Do you ever have one of those moments where you're struggling with a problem, you fall asleep, and then bam, you wake up with the answer? Well, today we're diving into one of the most famous stories in the history of science about how a chemist's strange daydream solved a puzzle that had literally stumped the entire scientific community. All right, so let's set the scene. The year is 1865, and our main character is the brilliant German chemist August Kekulé. He's right on the edge of a massive breakthrough. He just doesn't know it yet. So picture this. Kekulé is in his study in Ghent, Belgium. There's a fire crackling in the fireplace. He's been wrestling with this one stubborn chemical problem for ages, and he is just exhausted. He leans back in his chair and starts to drift off. Now, this is where things get weird. As he's in this half-asleep state, his scientific brain doesn't just switch off. Oh no. Instead, he starts seeing the very building blocks of matter. Atoms, just dancing and zipping around in his mind's eye, and they're forming these long, wriggling chains. The vision gets even more intense. These chains of atoms, they're not just straight lines. They're alive. They start twisting and turning with this fluid, snake-like motion. You have to imagine, he's not just thinking about chemistry at this point. He is seeing it come to life. And then comes the big moment. As he's watching this incredible atomic ballet, one of the snakes suddenly whips around, grabs its own tail right in its mouth, and starts spinning, forming a perfect, whirling circle. Now, what Kekulé saw actually has a name. It's the Ouroboros. This is an incredibly powerful, ancient symbol you can find in cultures all over the world. It usually represents eternity, or the endless cycle of life and death. You know, a pretty strange and mystical thing to pop into your head when you're supposed to be thinking about molecules. So, yeah, it sounds more like a fantasy than a scientific breakthrough, right? But believe it or not, this bizarre vision held the key to one of the biggest chemical mysteries of the 19th century. So, what exactly was the problem he was trying to solve? All right, let's get into the puzzle itself. The problem that was keeping Kekulé and pretty much the entire chemistry world up at night was a molecule called benzene. So here's the deal. Chemists had figured out the recipe for benzene. They knew it had 6 carbon atoms and 6 hydrogen atoms. Simple enough, right? But they had absolutely no clue how those 12 atoms were arranged. It was like having all the Lego pieces, but no instruction manual. Every idea they came up with just failed. See, back then, chemists thought that carbon atoms always formed long, open chains. But if you tried to make a chain with 6 carbons and only 6 hydrogens, it just didn't work. There weren't enough hydrogen atoms to go around and plug all the gaps. Plus, benzene was way more stable than it had any right to be. The math just wasn't adding up. It was a complete and utter mystery. And this, of course, brings us right back to that wild vision by the fireplace. That snake whirling in front of his eyes wasn't just some random dream. It was the answer, staring him right in the face. Years later, Kekulé actually told this story himself. At a big event in his honor, he described this exact moment. He said the image of the snake biting its own tail seemed to almost mock him, taunting him with a solution that was so simple and so close. That vision just shattered his drowsiness. He snapped awake with that jolt of adrenaline you get from a true eureka moment. And you bet he spent the rest of the night furiously scribbling, working out what this incredible revelation actually meant. So, how did he connect a dream about a snake to a real scientific theory? Well, it was an incredibly direct translation. The long body of the snake, that was the chain of 6 carbon atoms. The head biting the tail, that was the key. It meant the chain connected back on itself. This was the birth of his radical new idea, the closed chain hypothesis. And there it was, the solution that had eluded everyone. The atoms weren't in a straight line at all. No, they formed a perfect, stable, hexagonal loop, a ring. We now call it the benzene ring. This idea was an absolute game changer, and it would alter the course of chemistry forever. This discovery, and especially the story behind it, has become one of the most famous tales in the history of science. It's this perfect marriage of hard, rigorous logic and wild, creative intuition. Now, here's a really interesting little detail. Even though the dream happened in 1865, Kekulé kept it a secret for 25 years. It wasn't until 1890, at a huge festival celebrating his life's work that he finally stood up and revealed the dreamlike origin of his greatest discovery. Can you imagine holding on to a story like that for so long? So, what's the legacy here? Well, the discovery of the benzene ring itself was monumental. It's a fundamental structure in organic chemistry, the backbone for everything from plastics to medicines. But the legacy of the story is just as powerful. It's probably the ultimate example of our subconscious mind solving problems while we're not even paying attention. It reminds us that big breakthroughs aren't just about data and logic. They often need a huge leap of imagination. It proves that sometimes the most brilliant ideas can come from the most unlikely of places, like a daydream. And that's really what makes this story so incredible. It forces us to ask this really big question. Are discoveries just about rational thought and hard work? Or is there also a place for dreams, for symbols, for those sudden, unexplainable flashes of insight? It kind of makes you wonder, doesn't it? Maybe your next big idea is just one daydream away.